Well, I gotta say that I am glad to see y'all finally lightening up in here this morning. I was going to get Donna to pull the curtains over here and see if that baptismal pool was full of pickle juice or something. I don't know what's going on up in here. But I am very, very grateful that the Lord has visited with us this morning, and I hope He continues to do so through the message. Now, I've got a real spiritual message for you this morning, since this is around the time of year that we celebrate Christmas. And I know as soon as I announce the title of my message, there's going to be a lot of people watching on TV that's going to reach for the remote to turn it off. But here it is. It is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the Island of Misfit Toys. That's going to be my message today. And, well, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like a misfit? Let me tell you something. I walked in the bathroom a little while ago, and I hadn't paid no attention to my head this morning, and I got an Ace Ventura haircut. So I know what feeling like a misfit is. I'm going to try to fix that when I get out of here this evening, or put a hat on or something, you know. But, you know, maybe you do feel like a misfit. Maybe you feel abandoned. You feel like that nobody cared enough to stick around and care for you, and you kind of feel real, well, just abandoned right now. Maybe you felt unloved most of your life, and maybe you felt like you were unloved because you didn't measure up to what somebody expected you to be in order for them to love you. That's why you ought to get a dog. Or yeah, that's true. I would say cats love unconditionally, but we'll talk about that later. You ever felt like maybe that you were just not as good as everybody else, at least to the standards that people have? Have you ever felt like nothing ever worked out for you? Boy, it's getting real quiet in here again. Maybe you're one that never quite fits in with other people's ideas of the way you ought to be in order for them to hang around you. Believe it or not, that's a big problem in churches today too. There are a lot of people that go in churches and they come out feeling like a misfit because everybody had their nose up in the air. And they didn't want your kind, whatever that is, in their church. Well, let me say this. If that ever happens, that's not a church. That's a social club. That's not a church. Because everybody ought to be welcome. But if you have felt like that in all of the categories that I have mentioned, maybe you are a misfit. I can tell you that I have kind of felt that way most of my life. When I was young, my mother told me that all of my friends were crazy that I hung around with. And then, not long before she died, she said, "Son, you know, really nothing's ever changed. All your friends are still crazy." And a neighboring pastor of another church told me, he said, "Dave, I know you don't want to hear this, brother, but you are a nut magnet." So that's all right. That's what God has for me. Now, not that if you're my friend, that doesn't necessarily mean you're crazy, but most of you are. A woman from California once visited our office years ago, and she was asking a few questions about what all we did. And all of a sudden, she got this funny look on her face, and she started shouting and crying. I backed up a little bit. I don't know what was coming. And she said, "The Lord has shown me that this ministry would always be for those that nobody else wants." And as much as I have tried to steer it one way or the other, it comes back to that, because I was not wanted either in a lot of churches. I'll just be honest with you. I was looked at as second class. I don't look the part, sound the part, dress the part, all of those, and that's fine. They can have their thing. That's all right. Because I'm going to tell you something. Jesus was a misfit too, and I mean that with all reverence. Why did I say that? Religious leaders did not want him. They hated him. They didn't want anything to do with him. because he told it like it was, and he stood up and called them the hypocrites that they were. They wanted him dead. They hate him so bad. And the religious people that are religious don't want him either. Churches are full this morning of religious people, but not people that really love the Lord. It wouldn't matter what kind of religion it was, they'd still be religious. You know who Jesus fit in the best with? The roughest people in the world. There wasn't nothing more crude, vulgar, or rough than a fisherman back then. That's who he flocked to. If he came to town, he'd be eating breakfast at the Waffle House and lunch at the tea room, because I love to do that too. That's where you'd find him. He hung out with tax collectors. They were the most hated people in the world, and ain't nothing changed in 2,000 years. He had a special place for the unwanted. Let me give you an example. In Luke chapter 16 and verse 19, it said there was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desired to be fed with the crumbs from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. That's all he got out of life. Never had anything. He was sick. He was miserable. He was a beggar. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeing Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom, and he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted and you are tormented. Jesus was teaching the fact that while you may not fit in here on this earth, and I know a lot of people that just never quite did, and that's many of us, and you may not have anything here, but you can one day if you follow Christ and you trust in him. That's the ultimate final reward. Here was Lazarus, a misfit, but God took him to be with him, and then he was comforted forever after that. Want to warn you something. If you like to work with misfits, maybe you're not one. If you're not, you hide it well. But if you're not one, but you want to help misfits and you want to work with misfits, you're going to get your hands dirty. You're going to get your hands dirty. And Jesus knew that. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Here's one example. Mark chapter 1 and verse 40, it said there came a leper to Jesus, beseeching him, and kneeling down to him, and saying unto him, If you will, you can make me clean. Let me tell you something wrong that the leper did according to the rules of the day. First of all, it was absolutely forbidden and against the law for a person with leprosy to approach another person on the street. They're supposed to go all the way to the other side of the street and cry, unclean, unclean. That means don't come near me, I've got leprosy. But that was a big no-no for this guy to run up to Jesus and kneel down in front of him and say, you can make me clean if you will. But let me say this, and most of you can understand it. When you are a misfit who is in trouble, you ain't got time to worry about protocol. You ain't got time to worry about nothing. You run toward that help, and you don't waste your time being proper. That misfit leper came running to Jesus. I remember one time I was about 20 years ago, I was in a recording studio that was totally soundproof, and we were in there recording some radio shows, me and Bill Martin, until after 11 o'clock. And I never heard the horrible storm that hit Central Virginia and dumped about 2 inches of rain, because we had headphones on, we were in a soundproof room, And when I go back out that night, everything had cleared up. So I'm driving home down Isaac Walton Road going home, and this was before they fixed those awful bridges down at the bottom of the hill. And the whole thing was underwater. Well, when I drove up, I had a little old Toyota station wagon back then, and I said, well, it couldn't be that much. You know, I don't remember seeing no rain, so I drove, and all of a sudden the water overtook my car, started lifting it up. And I was in danger of getting washed down the stream. And I didn't have time to properly address the Lord and beseech him and give him all the titles. I just hollered, God, you got to help me right now. And he did. I was able to actually get the thing started again, and I slammed it in reverse so far it paddled me back up onto the bank, so to speak. But when you're in trouble, you ain't got time to go through all the protocol and all of that. And so Jesus here, when that leper came to him, breaking all the rules, this poor misfit that was going to die eventually, or so he thought. Jesus, looking at him, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and said unto him, I will, be thou clean. Now here we find Jesus was moved with compassion for this poor misfit leper, and he knows his sickness, he knows his loneliness, he knows his pain, and now Jesus is going to break the rules too. That's the one thing I like about him too. He didn't care what people thought he ought to do. He did what was necessary. He puts his hands on this man. You know what? That can get you killed if a person has leprosy and you touch him. But he was the Son of God, God the Son, the great physician himself, right there in the flesh. And he puts his hands on him, and he spoke to him, and he touched him, and he cleansed him, and he made the misfit whole again. And it took a risk. Helping people that just don't fit in nowhere is going to cause you to take a risk. Yes, it will. Now, we find in John chapter 8 where Jesus, he helped misfits that other people wanted to kill. Y'all ever met anybody that needed killing before? Me and Jordan were going over a list of them back there this morning during Sunday school. I said, I'll shoot him, and he said, oh, I want the personal touch. Let me at him. We were having a good time with the list. But that's the truth. There are some people that everybody just wants to, just rather that they died. But Jesus went to those people, and he left us an example that's really tough to follow, but it's the right thing to do. Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives, verse 1, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down, and he taught them. Now here he was in the temple, and he was teaching, and the scribes and Pharisees, they were the hypocrites, they were the religious leaders. They were the ones that didn't want to see Jesus in the temple. They tried to throw him off a cliff on the first sermon that he ever preached. They did. They grabbed him and tried to throw him off a cliff. I didn't do that bad. My first sermon was at the Lynchburg detention home. I was actually there visiting and preaching, okay? I was over 18 at the time. And I had a captive audience. They couldn't go nowhere, nor could they jump me for preaching because I had all kinds of security surrounding me back there. But Jesus was teaching in the temple. And the scribes and the Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they set her in the midst, they surrounded her and they put her right in the middle. They said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. They went in with whoever she was with and dragged her out. Where's the man at? Why did they leave him? That showed what hypocrites they were. They brought the woman in there. And they said this, now Moses in the law commanded that such should be stoned, But what do you say? Trying to put him on the spot. Brought this misfit in there that had committed a capital crime, a sinner, and they wanted to bait Jesus to see what he was going to say. And this they said, tempting him that they might be able to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down. Right while they were hollering, and what are you going to do about it? What do you say? He got down on the ground and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. He was ignoring them. You know what he was writing while on the ground with his finger? The names of the girlfriends of the scribes and Pharisees, most likely.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to bet that's what he was doing. But they continued asking him. And so he lifted up himself, and he said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast the stone at her. Any of you that are sinless, come on up here and get a rock. We did that one Sunday. We put some rocks up here, and we got some of our worst sinners in the congregation here and lined them up front and said, all right, who wants to throw a rock at them? We actually did that, and it was kind of humorous, but it got the point across. They pulled me down there with them. And nobody could come forward and pick up a stone because they had some problems between them and the Lord too. And he got back down, and he kept writing on the ground. And when they heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the oldest or eldest, even unto the last. And so Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. They all got up and left. They were afraid because they knew Jesus knew who they were and could point out what they were doing. He knew what was on their minds. And when Jesus had lifted up himself, he saw nobody but the woman. And he said unto her, Woman, where are your accusers? Has no man condemned you? And she said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. And then he makes this statement, and this is what people need to listen to nowadays. He said, Go and sin no more. Jesus never gives anybody a license to sin. He will forgive you. He will not condemn you. He'll save you. And then he said, you get back out there and don't you do that again. Don't you go out there sinning again. Salvation is not a license to sin. Jesus was dealing with one of the biggest misfits of all. A person who was immoral and had committed a capital offense, which was adultery. But here Jesus stuck his neck out for one that nobody wanted to have anything to do with except stone her to death. We need to remember that. When her accusers surrounded her, she had nobody to care, no one to come to her defense. And Jesus told her in love, I do not condemn you. Go and sin no more. And he saved this misfit's life and changed it forever. Now let's go to the Island of Misfit Toys. I watch that show probably about once a year. And it always grips my heart. I don't know why. It's a silly animated show. But when they go to that poor old island of Misfit Toys, there's a bunch of toys on there that nobody wants. Does it ever get to any of y'all, or am I just a nut? And every time that poor little rag doll says, I don't even think I can dream anymore, that makes me want to cry. It really does. I ain't kidding you. I've always had a soft spot for people that have been cast down. I always have. And it's what God has given me all my life. So here now we're going to the Island of Misfit Toys, and we're going in search of those that nobody wants. Those who have been crippled, lamed, marred, and scarred by this world. Let me say this. If you can't come to the house of God and find somebody that cares about you and will pray with you and will help lift you up, where in the world can you go? All of the other places that you could go, they might hang out with you, but they'll tear you down. Maybe you've been put together wrong according to this world, forgotten and put away. Maybe you feel that way right now because of the unique problems that you have. A lot of you don't know everybody in here. And a lot of you don't know the church leadership very well. You know who they are, and you like hearing them sing or preach or teach or whatever it is they are doing. But let me say this, I know all of them. And it would just floor you to know the pits that God pulled them out of. Don't ever think that because somebody has got a position in church that they were perfect and had a great childhood and had a great adulthood and everything went. No. These are people that God just miraculously saved and miraculously gifted and miraculously used, and He can do the exact same thing with you. Let's take a look at King David. He showed God's heart in a particular act that he did in 2 Samuel chapter 9. Here we find King David is heading now to the house of Misfit Toys, looking for whom he can show love to, even the family of his former enemy, King Saul. We find that King Saul and even his son Jonathan, who David loved, had both died. They were killed. And there were very few people left in the family. Most all of Saul's family was killed by the enemy, and there was only a handful left, just a bunch of misfits that nobody even thought were fit to kill. You ever felt like you weren't even fit to die? That's terrible, but it happens, don't it? David said, "Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Jonathan was David's best friend, son of Saul, and now he's dead. "And there was of the house of Saul a servant named Ziba. And when they had called him unto David, the king said, Are you Ziba? And he said, Thy servant is he. And the king said, Is there yet not any of the house of Saul that I can show the kindness of God unto him?" And Ziba said to the king, "Jonathan has one son left, and he's lame on his feet. His nurse was trying to escape with him when he was 5 years old and fell, and he was crippled for the rest of his life ever since he was 5, lame on his feet." That phrase, lame on his feet, made him a non-viable human being back in those days. They didn't take care of handicapped people very well back then. Only the strong survived pretty much, and so he was fairly well abandoned. And yet David is going after the misfits. So King David was a nut magnet too, wasn't he? Praise God. And so David sent, and he fetched him. The king said, "Where is he?" And Ziba said, "He is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel in Lodabar." And the king sent and fetched him out of the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel. And so David had him brought to him. And his name is Mephibosheth. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was coming to David, this is what he did. He fell on his face and he did reverence. And David said, "Mephibosheth," and he answered, "Behold, your servant." Poor old crippled misfit Mephibosheth was horrified. He was sure that David was going to kill him because he didn't feel like he was worth anything else but that. And David said to him, "Fear not, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and I will restore you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you will eat bread at my table continually." Oh my God, do you know what he's saying? Does anybody get that? Oh, wow. I want you to eat at the king's table. I want you to fellowship with the king. I want you to eat the king's food. I want you to dwell in my presence. And he bowed himself and he said, what is your servant that you would look upon such a dead dog as I am? That's how he felt. No more than a dead dog. Mephibosheth knew he was worthy of nothing. And he even told the king, what do you want with a dead dog? The mercy of God. Oh my goodness, if you could just fathom the mercy of God this morning. The king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and he said unto him, I have given unto your master's son all that pertained to Saul and to all his house. He made that poor, crippled, misfit beggar an instant rich man in a moment of time. He would never have to do without. Not only did he show mercy, but he showed grace. He showed grace, and he gave him the inheritance of all that pertained to King Saul, and David could have taken it for himself like all the other kings did, but instead he gave it to a lame, crippled misfit. Boy, that's what you call the Christmas spirit. Amen. The grace of God. Don't ever think for 1 minute that any of you in here, me included and Donna included, are sitting in here this morning by any merit of our own or anything we've done. You are only alive, and I am only alive by the grace of God. You are only saved, if you are saved this morning, by the grace of God. You didn't earn a thing. I remember stupid old Michael Bloomberg up there in New York said that he's earned his place in heaven. I'm sorry, but he's got a place waiting for him in hell if he don't get saved. You don't earn your place in heaven. Nobody in here can earn a single thing except eternal punishment. That's all we've ever earned. And it's the grace of God, because we are no better than that lame, crippled, misfit Mephibosheth. And so he ordered the servants that had once worked for Saul, and he said, now you and your sons and your servants, you till the land for Mephibosheth, and you bring him the fruits, that your master's son may have food to eat, and Mephibosheth thy master's son shall eat bread always at my table. And Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands, I will do. As for Mephibosheth, saith the king, he's going to eat at my table as one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Mitchah. And all that dwelled in the house of Ziba were servants unto Mephibosheth. And so he dwelt in Jerusalem, and he did eat continually at the king's table, and was lame in both of his feet. My misfit friend, I want you to listen to me, whoever you are this morning. God wants you to experience the love and the mercy and the grace that is beyond what you can imagine. He wants you to feast from his table all of your days, and in the end to dwell with him forever. Not because you were good, but because he is gracious. My invitation for you today is to bow to him today. Admit to him that you're not worthy. And don't worry, bring all of your baggage, bring all of your problems, bring your sickness, your weaknesses, your addictions, everything that makes you up to be what you are. Bring it to him and give yourself to him today, and come and eat at the king's table. Shall we bow?